Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast for our final segment of the day. As always, to conclude our Wednesday show, it is our weekly Shadow Report. We'll be discussing the key wide receiver cornerback matchups will define the fantasy football weekend. And this week, I wanted to go over some very familiar matchups between guys that we've seen before on this list, but I also wanted to go with a little couple of under-the-radar matchups as well. Now, all of these are either divisional rivalries or just match between two stellar corners. But the first one I wanted to start out with is a little bit unorthodox because I want to respect certain matchups that you feel the wide receiver has the advantage in, but you also have to monitor this cornerback. And that's the first one that I want to go to because this is a bizarre matchup, a bizarre trap game for the specific team I'm going to be talking about, but also kind of wanted to break up the monotony of this list because the other three matchups are basically star against star. And this one isn't necessarily viewed that way. So without further ado, let's jump right into the first Shadow Report matchup of the week. Starting off with that bizarre one, Mike Evans going up against Jack Jones. It's Bucs Raiders. This is a very weird game in my opinion because this one feels like the trappiest of trap games. You have the Bucs trying to build momentum to get back into the lead in the NFC South, and the Raiders, seemingly, not necessarily out of it, but just kind of playing for pride in certain situations, but not overall a team you would feel confident in upsetting someone down the road. But this match between Mike Evans and Jack Jones could be a very anomalous one in this game. I do expect the Bucs to truly dominate physically this Raiders defense, which seems weird because they have one of the most physical players on their defensive line in Max Crosby, but the Bucs are a very tough offense to take down. Baker Mayfield's a tough guy. Mike Evans is a physical receiver. You have a lot of physical, shifty players in your backfield, so this is going to be a tough matchup for the Raiders. But the reason why I isolated this one matchup because the Raiders aren't necessarily known for their secondary depth. They're more known for their front seven guys. But Jack Jones is someone who has been around the league, very experienced guy, former Patriot, and I think out of all their corners, he's the best one and most likely to really shadow and be able to shadow effectively a guy like Mike Evans. And if you're the Bucs, you're going to have to stay composed in certain situations because the Raiders can force you out of structure if you're Baker in terms of generating pressure from their front. So look for certain situations to be a lot tougher for the Bucs than you might expect, and look for Baker to try and find Mike Evans for most of his first reads early and often. But Jack Jones is someone who I want to be a standout X factor here in this one because he's going to be responsible for trying to keep this Raiders secondary room together because that's the most likely unit to fall apart here in this matchup. I think the Raiders can keep this a lot closer than people think, but I do feel like the Bucs are going to be all about physicality and taking it to them and matching up really well man-to-man on that front. And so, if the Raiders can be able to win this cornerback battle here between two solid players here, then chances are they're going to stay in this football game. But if they can't, and Baker Mayfield gets whatever he wants in long situations, then it's going to be trouble a-brewing for Oakland in this. Las Vegas in this one. No longer Oakland there. But I just wanted to highlight this matchup as one of the weirder ones of the weekend. Now let's get into more chalk matchups, more superstar versus superstar matchups. Starting off with one that actually kind of feels exactly like this one, but still are two superstar level players, even though the cornerback is in a very bad defense. It's Justin Jefferson going up against A.J. Terrell. I believe we've seen this match before in the past, and I do feel like A.J. Terrell is capable of really shutting down a guy like Justin Jefferson, funnily enough. He's faced a lot of different receivers this season, run the gamut of receivers. Mike Evans, he's faced DK Metcalf, I believe he's faced. Let me think. Who else has he faced? He's faced Chris Olave, I believe. He's faced a lot of talented receivers. And he's been around the block and been one of the premier cornerbacks of the past 5 years. And in this matchup, it's weird because I actually don't think Justin Jefferson is going to have the quote-unquote advantage in this one. but I do think that Justin Jefferson's presence going up against AJ Terrell is really going to be a nightmare for the rest of the Falcons defense, because Justin Jefferson is going to occupy a lot of space for the Vikings on offense. Whether or not he gets the ball is really up to Sam Darnold and the game flow, right? Because the Vikings are a very versatile team at their core. They don't necessarily need to have Justin Jefferson going that early in football games. So look for him to be more present rather than ultimately be more winning in terms of his matchup. But it's still an interesting one to dissect, because Justin Jefferson has the ability to go off. But in certain situations, he knows when to rein it in and allow certain other players to make noise for this Vikings offense. And he's done it in recent weeks as well. So this one could be a weird one to analyze. Maybe you might want to sit Justin Jefferson this week, surprisingly. But it's just one that sits in my mind as more of a tactical one rather than trying to really one-up each other, because that's kind of what has been the story of Justin Jefferson this season. And then the third matchup, another one we see very often in the National Football League over there in the AFC, is Tyreek Hill against Sauce Gardner. Now this one kind of has lost its luster. Both of these teams are not where they want to be, obviously, but it's still a fun matchup because these two are going to be facing each other for years to come in the AFC East. I mean, both of these guys, really speedy guys, really physical in nature at the position, more so Sauce, but Tyreek Hill has added that to his game. In this matchup, we finally get to see, the true test of why Sauce Gardner might be falling off a little bit, and why this Jets defense as a whole has lacked the kind of grittiness of last year's secondary. So that's why I feel like this matchup may not be as fun as past iterations of it, but it's still an important one from a fantasy perspective because, let's be honest, Tyreek Hill can get going for you at any different time. But this one is also going to come down to tactics as well, and more so pride, because I feel like, for what it's worth, Sauce Gardner has been a lot more reserved this season. He's been a lot less loud, a lot less braggadocious, and that's what I like about Sauce. He backs his swagger up a little bit, but he hasn't necessarily been doing that. He hasn't necessarily been on the field that much, it feels like to me, in critical moments. And so that's why I feel like overall this Jets defense seems to be lacking a leader in that secondary. Potentially, the Dolphins are going to want to exploit that, and they feel like they're going to have the advantage. They're going to have the overwhelming amount of matchup they want to exploit in this one as well. So this one could be very weird for this Jets secondary. But if Sauce Gardner plays the level we know he's capable of, then this matchup really comes down to, well, is Tyreek Hill going to be Tyreek Hill? Because, like I said, this Dolphins offense is too diverse to really know week in, week out if Tyreek Hill is going to be of that much importance to it. Because we see Jonnu Smith stepping up. We're seeing the rejuvenation of Devon Achane over these past couple of weeks. And so we really don't necessarily know the true standing of what Tyreek Hill can mean to this offense down the stretch. And even if they want to make a little run at the postseason, because they're 5-7 right now, and chances are they might have to win out to really make a push at an AFC wildcard spot. So that's why I feel like this one could be an interesting one. Just because, much like the Justin Jefferson and AJ Terrell one, this one kind of stems down to the importance of both of these players in this game and which one is more effective in terms of this matchup as well. And the last one, another one we see very often as well, this one with a lot of meaning in it, Amon-Ra St. Brown going up against Jair Alexander. And this is going to be a fun one because Amon-Ra is unlike any wide receiver one in the National Football League because he combines so many different traits so well, but he's not someone who, is a quote-unquote superstar kind of mentality player, if you know what I mean. He's not someone who, he's understated, is what I'm trying to say, in terms of his superstardom, because he is a superstar, but the way he does it is completely unique to what the Detroit Lions do and to what the receivers are able to do. Because Amon-Ra is one of those guys who may not have the largest presence throughout the game, but he's always someone who can find a rhythm at any given time, and you can't stop him. Once Amon-Ra gets in rhythm, once him and Goff develop that rapport throughout the game, chances are you're not going to be able to stop him. And he does it with succinct route running, he does it with precision, he does it with instant decision making at the line, and he understands corners' tendencies better than most receivers in this National Football League. Going up against Jaire Alexander, a very aggressive, physical cover man, Amon-Ra is going to want to get in his head in terms of his route running abilities. Because if you know the Lions feel like they're going to win this game passing the football, then by all means, Amon-Ra becomes much more important than, say, if they're going to want to grind the Packers out with a run game. And so, if you're Jaire Alexander, you're not going to want to get caught up in how Amon-Ra St. Brown is going to utilize his talent. Because in the end of the day, Amon-Ra is so frustrating to defend because he's one of the best route runners, if not the best route runner in the National Football League. And so, in certain moments when the Packers are seemingly gaining momentum, maybe it's a 3rd and long situation, and they want to get off the field, and they want to get the ball back to their offense, that's where you can't let your head drop if you're Jaire Alexander. He's been excellent at it all year, him and McKinney. But look for Jaire Alexander to really be tested in this one in terms of trying to be too aggressive and allowing Amon-Ra to develop that rhythm that he so covets between him and Jared Goff, because that's poison to any team. You can't let Amon-Ra St. Brown get going against you, because that really eliminates a lot of what you can bring in terms of physicality on the defensive side of the football. And that's the trap, like I said, that the Packers will want to avoid, and Jaire Alexander especially will want to avoid in this matchup. Let me know what you think about this one in the comments, because that will just about do it for today's edition of the show. I've been Christopher Shepard. This has been the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Like, follow, and subscribe to the show in the network if you feel so inclined. Make yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube as well. Great way to contribute and interact with the show. Other than that, see you tomorrow at 3:30 p.m. Eastern for another great edition of the show. I am out.